Hi guys. Before we proceed to this video, we've got something very important to share with you. Neoliberalism, Inequality and Authoritarianism by Professor John V. Kofis is available for purchase. You can order it directly from the publisher Little French eBooks or through Amazon.
Hello, welcome to a teaser session on a competitive analysis of the Great Depression of the 1930s and what many call the Great Recession of 2007-2008, which lingered on into the second decade of the 21st century. In just 3 years from now, this is September 2025, in just 3 years, in 2028, we will have the 30th anniversary of the so-called Great Recession of 2008, which started with the subprime mortgage crisis, as well as derivatives and other speculative products, rampant speculation on Wall Street, and then it spread to the rest of the world. And so the first thing I want to point out is that economic contraction is not confined to a single country, although within it is true that every country within different degrees experiences contraction when capitalism as a world system in its 500-year history experiences contraction. It just so happens that in the 21st century, the G7, the United States-led G7, basically Japan and the US and Northwest Europe, are countries that, not just Northwest Europe, Italy is in there as well, are countries that are experiencing steady and chronic decline in their share of world GDP in comparison with the China-led BRICS group. By the way, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is holding its a very important gathering. President Xi Jinping in Shanghai is holding a very important gathering where they are strategizing about how to consolidate the China-led BRICS group and affiliated countries with that new core, which in essence will replace the G7 already in nominal as well as purchasing power parity terms. That group is well ahead of the United States. The latest statistics is just China versus the United States, GDP measured in purchasing power parity. The United States is $10 trillion behind China. This is the latest statistics, 10 trillion. This means that China has enormous leverage, not to mention rare earth minerals thrown into the mix, not to mention the fact that China is rapidly catching up, if not moving ahead of the United States and the G7 in artificial intelligence and in high tech and biotechnology. The question that I discuss in the longer video is how the structural elements, the structural nature of capitalism necessarily entails contracting cycles as it does expanding cycles. However, also the fact that the capitalist system under certain regimes pursuing policies that are detrimental to to market equilibrium precipitate and hasten economic contraction. And we are seeing signs. We have been seeing signs, and we are continuing to see signs, especially in the United States and Europe, of exactly this, namely that the policies, not just the structural elements embedded into the capitalist system, showing that there will be definitely a very deep contraction. No one can tell. No one can tell. People have been trying to predict and throw out numbers. It's going to be that year and that month that we're going to see the start of a depression or a great recession. No one really knows. But it will take place, and it will not be that long that it will take place. And the question that concerns me as a scholar of international political economy is who benefits and who is harmed. The fact is that there are a couple of thousand billionaires in the world that own more wealth than 50% of the world's population. We have roughly 8 billion people, 8.5, somewhere in that neighborhood. The fact is, a couple of thousand people own more wealth than the bottom 50%. This is extreme economic inequality in the world capitalist system. And this is one of the underlying causes, because systemically, overproduction, which obviously necessarily entails underconsumption, is a key catalyst to what we call a Great Depression or a Great Recession, or even mild, depending on the circumstances. But that's not the only worrying sign. The fragmentation of the world capitalist economy, because the United States and its G7 partners are losing ground to China and the BRICS group, India in that package, in that group, in the BRICS group, Russia in that BRICS group. Russia, by the way, as much as Russia has been involved in the war in Ukraine, the fact is that it's still number 4. It ranks number 4 economy in the world, the 4th economy, largest economy in the world, measured in purchasing power parity. So Russia has a very large economy and vast raw materials, obviously needed for China's manufacturing sector to continue to grow. There is also the reality that the G7 have decided, this is a policy decision, this has nothing to do with inherent or structural elements of capitalism. They have decided, led by the United States, which wants that money to stimulate its military-industrial complex, to raise defense spending astronomically. NATO members will go from 3% required. They were not spending 3%. Only a couple of countries were spending 3%. They will go from 3% to 5%. The United States reaching that $1 trillion mark in defense spending, when you have an economy of roughly 29 trillion and you spend 1 trillion on defense. And this doesn't count, by the way, related aspects of the defense sector like intelligence and State Department and so forth. It doesn't count any of that. There is the issue of where do you get the money? And there are only 2 sources. You add to the public debt, which in the US, in the case of the United States, is approaching 37 trillion and rising rapidly at alarming rates, by the way, and expected to rise very rapidly in the next 5 years. And they also get it out of slashing the social safety net. This concerns scholars who argue that in the next recession, the social safety net will be so weakened that people will, in fact, experience conditions like the Great Depression, when there were beggars in the street selling a basket of apples for 10 cents. So we are looking at uh, basically a political economy with inherent traits of um, structural impediments to its continued growth mythology that its apologists maintain it has, when in fact it doesn't work like that. Capitalism expands and contracts. This is how it has operated for 500 years. And secondly, there are policies designed to continue to accumulate capital, to concentrate capital in the hands of the very few. In the case of the United States, 1% owning more capital than the bottom 90%. And the question is, when you simultaneously have weakened the social safety net of a country like that, what happens when there is a severe economic depression, economic contraction, and namely depression, or a great recession, as they like to call it? By the way, there are economists and scholars who don't like the term Great Recession. They argue that's a misnomer. But let's just say a deep recession near the levels of a depression, economic depression. All of this has to do with the depth and the longevity, by the way, the scale and the longevity of economic contraction, and as well as, of course, how many consecutive quarters there is negative GDP growth. There's continued decline in GDP, as well as unemployment figures. We'll discuss this in the longer video. The other troubling things are that deliberate policies, especially in the United States, part of the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, which the Trump administration has embraced and it has adopted as part of its policies, there are in there fiscal, investment, monetary, trade policies, which are troublesome insofar as they do, by the way, they do anticipate, because they're realists, that at some point there will be a severe economic contraction. And the question for them is, how do we make sure that the capitalist class remains strong and dominant? Through authoritarianism is their answer, by the way. Okay, so this has far-reaching political implications. And the other thing here is, what happens to the working class? What happens to the middle class? They're weakened. And the enigma is, how will they react? Will they be docile, just accept it? Because the culture of fear that has been instilled through the media and through institutions, whether in the United States or other G7 and other countries, not just G7, will have them scared to death, and so they will be hiding and they won't do anything? Or will they pour out into the streets and demonstrate and demand a change in the social contract? Now, the next downward cycle will, in fact, not be, it's estimated that it will not be one where China will step in like it did in 2008 to rescue the G7. China stimulated its own economy because the state's structure is so powerful, because they have a state-directed capitalist economy through one-party state, the Communist Party, but the Communist Party determines through long-term plans, 5-year plans, economic planning. And the Communist Party, by the way, does not allow the private sector to be dominant over the state. The state is dominant over the private sector. But that state structure poured enormous stimulative packages into their own economy to make sure that they kept employment levels up and living standards as high as they could amid the Great Recession of 2007, 2008, as it was called. At the same time, they stimulated the economy of the United States, other countries as well. They bought treasury bonds to make sure the dollar is strengthened, to put some more liquidity into the U.S. economy, and to make sure that the U.S. economy, which was bailing out, by the way, the largest corporations, corporate welfare system here, another sign that there's no way that an economic contraction, the next economic contraction cycle is going to be a bad one, because corporate welfare simply means that the large corporate entities absorb capital from the public sector, the state being the entity that redistributes income, by the way, in society. And that means that the rest of society, the middle class and the working class, are left with the crumbs to divide amongst themselves. So downward pressure on wages for the working class and the middle class. This, again, has sociopolitical implications. Already we see the class war in the United States that the capitalist, as Warren Buffett has pointed out, has declared on the working class. It is now, initially, the first 6 months of the Trump administration, it wasn't, it started actually with Biden, it continues with Trump, has targeted migrants, but migrants are nothing but workers. So it's still the working class, whether they're migrants or not. But there is a anti-trade union mentality. There's an anti-working class mentality. And the question is, what will all this look like when there is a major economic contraction? These are the issues that I explore in the long analytical video. I invite you to join me. I invite you to ask questions and to write comments, and to please join this channel. Thank you very much.